Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie Kabov, and my dear friend Jonathan Fremantle. Uh, I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third-generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth-generation art professional, uh, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, and partly raised in Australia, lived and worked in London and Paris, and 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art as life goes on. And without further ado, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, Jonathan Fremantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense, and have been more making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg, where I had Hazard Gallery, and that was the context that I met Valerie about 10, 12 years ago, and just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. And that conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation, and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it usually goes anywhere and everywhere, but somehow we always come back to art, and
Yeah,
because it is the love that loves us back. Thank you very
right.
much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing the journey. Happy New Year, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, Happy New Year.
This is technically our first one for the 2025.
Yeah.
We're going to date this podcast sort of irretrievably forever and a day. And so, and I'm here in New York. This is the first time we're both in the Northern Hemisphere at the same
Did you
time.
not do one when you were in Paris? I think we did.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we did. You're right. But it wasn't as cold. It
No.
was not as cold. Sort of in the negatives here in New York. And I thought this week, because I'm in a city which has coined the term Nepo baby, we could have a conversation, our spin on Nepo babies without, by
Mm.
talking about Nepo babies without trust funds, because I think there's been this conception that somehow there's something wrong with ending up in an industry where your whole family is.
Mm.
And and also a lot of people, in the arts, the last thing they want is for their children to end up in that industry.
True.
I had like a super visceral reaction when Dovi said, when you asked, what is he going to do when he grows up? And he said, I'm going to work for First Floor Gallery Harare. And I was mortified. I'm like, why on earth would you want to do that? And so, this kind of conception that it's somehow a privilege
Yeah.
is overstated. And also, we're probably in the most unstable of all industries, just that the people who end up being in the public eye and visible, appear to be extraordinarily privileged. And and that leads to all sorts of misconceptions of power, or inappropriate power and inappropriate uses of power. Whereas, plumbers who have way more stability and in terms of income, their kids who go into the business never get accused of being Nepo babies.
No,
So
no, they're just picking up whatever it is, Fremantle and
the
Son.
family trade, I mean, but is it not just the family trade? I mean,
Yes.
let's just think about it. Everyone is just as able, and then there's just some people have more visibility. right?
Definitely. I think I mean, in some parts of the world, it's not a problem. I remember listening to Ali Farka talking about the tradition of I forget the word now, but
With the talking drum. Yeah, the word is
the word for the musicians, they're
yeah.
anyway, it's a lovely word as well. Anyway, they're essentially destined to be musicians, and they have a role in society, and their father was, and their grandfather was, and that role isn't just kind of it comes with the magic of having the ancestors with you. So that that seems to be right. I grew up with an artist father, and I had what you described earlier, where definitely had the feeling that he wasn't keen on me until I was really obviously going to be an artist. I don't think he would have actively encouraged it. There was definitely a moment, I remember I came home with this giant drawing I'd done at school, and I unrolled it. And I remember the look in his eyes was something like, "Oh my God, that's brilliant," and "Oh fuck." It's,
Oh, yeah.
this is not a thing that we can stop now. Um, so that
Too late. Yeah. How old were you?
yeah, and and I look at my own boys, and I must say I'm slightly excited when they do well at science. When they do well at art, I think, oh, okay. Um, but then there's another side to it, which is I think you sent me a link, which was the beginning of this process of thinking about it, where an artist who was talking about the how it's different for a first generation artist to someone who's had artists in their family. My father's an artist, my great grandmother, my great great aunt, and so on. That the point he was making was that your considerations as an artist who's up in an environment of art is about the craft. You're looking at, does this color work? Does that tree look like a tree? How do I mix this thing to make it look like that? So you're not really thinking about, is it art or is it not art? You're just making art. And so, and I do think that's an advantage. I think there's a kind of naturalness that comes with that. And then there's the other thing, which I know I've got. I have to admit to it, but it's definitely in me. And I remember reading Picasso talking about his relationship with his artist father, where he kind of wanted to defeat him. He wanted to make a work that was better than his father. And when he did it at age 18 or whatever it was, and his father was kind of angry and in some way there was a conflict. I remember hearing that story and thinking, yeah, that's how you do it.
Wow.
And Da
Kind
Vinci,
of did it though. He
he
kind
did
of
it. I
did.
mean, he did. And then Da Vinci talking about, it's a poor student who does not surpass his master, etc. That kind of dimension definitely adds to
Oh,
it. But it does come with a disadvantage, which is this kind of baggage that comes with the career of an artist. You know, I'm really talking about success. Are you successful? How do you measure success? And the baggage that comes with maybe not fully achieving that on the timeline that you have in your mind, then
but
yeah, those are the kind of
but
pitfalls. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's harder to because you already have certain paradigms of what success is
Yeah.
in particular, and it's quite visible. And then, I remember, I mean, it's taken me quite some time to come back to art, as a third generation person, right? And as a mediator, having also practiced art, but for me, the comparison is having been a lawyer and realizing kind of later down the line how far behind I was. Everyone else who was born into a family of lawyers, they understood everything about the industry. They knew the steps that had to be taken. And I was just like free floating, like entirely free floating. And that was a massive disadvantage. But then because of the sort of concept of you don't know what you don't know, right? Whereas when you are, a Nepo baby, you know what you don't know, there is this moment, and I find it also very often when I do studio visits and crits that I will just give myself space to just talk off the top of my head, just say whatever is the first thing that comes into my mind, and without judging it or without sort
Mhm.
of just tapping it, and it's unequivocally always right. And I come out with things that I very often didn't know before, right? It was just like, this is what this is. And I didn't know that I knew that. And I just have started to trust that I know what I don't know. And that's kind of, and I think that's in some ways the privilege. But having said that, I think given that we're in this world of binaries, I thought that the example of Artemisia Gentileschi is really
Yeah.
cute in that sense because she's a Nepo kid, 100%, right? But she's a feminist icon. How how do our friends uh, how do our friends reconcile those two? Okay, she did. How do they reconcile her being super privileged, having grown up and given an opportunity to have a career
Yeah.
as an artist, despite the obstacles, right, that we
Yeah.
know.
Huge
But
obstacle.
with that extreme privilege, right, at a
Mm.
certain point, I just think there's swings and roundabouts for everybody, and I think, and also I think a lot of people don't really consider the whole matrix of their backgrounds
Yeah.
when they enter any field and how relevant it is. It's not just because I think it buys into the nature nurture argument as well. And so, uh, to suggest that someone is extremely privileged merely because of the context in which they're born is completely sidelines the fact that, like, I think more than 80% of your uh, personality and predispositions are you're born with.
Yeah.
So I'm very much a nature person, right?
Mm.
And I think the more the more science develops, the more it sort of leans on that side, is that the nurture can only defeat some of nature or, amplify it, but it can't change anything. So like it would go kind of against any sensibility for somebody who's born in a family where they're naturally gifted at something and they just say, you know what, no, I will renege on this because this is somehow privileged. I will become a welder. Not that there's anything wrong with being a welder. I will become a gentleman farmer or something instead of being a virtuoso musician because this would show that I am not, I don't know. It just seems
Definitely.
it's kind of
Sometimes
nonsense.
it is nonsense, and there's a kind of shame associated with capitalizing on good luck, if you want to call it good luck. So that somehow that's one that you didn't deserve it, that leg up, or whatever it is that it is. But if you pan out from that rather than, there's been times where I've um, uh, maybe yearned for something simpler. Like if only I did just want to be a plumber, it
Mm.
would be simpler because then I wouldn't know as much as I know, in terms of how far away I am from where I want to go and how much it matters and um, how deeply personal it is to me to make work that it happens to be art. Um, and yet somehow the most natural state, the best work that I make comes, like you saying with the crits, it comes from a kind of other place which appears to be beyond you or bigger than you. And and the craft of making work, which I am so familiar with, and I think that's partly because would go into my dad's studio as a kid, and I know what the smells are. I know what I kind of touched all these things before I even knew what they were. And even a little thing like a reverence for a certain material, um, like masking tape. He was always very sparing with masking tape because he knew, you know, how much how valuable it was and how much it cost, but also what you can do with it. And so somehow that reverence, which you can't, that is tradition, that is what ancestors bring you, which is a kind of reverence for the ordinary things, and they become sacred by the way you look at them and touch them. So that I never did think I had to learn. Um, I don't have that. Every now and then we'll do something like I started making films a while ago with zero skill. Like I just thought it can't be that hard, And then I ended up making sort of okay things, and you do get that sort of bravado, that good luck bravado thing when you've discovered a new trick. Um, but pretty soon you hit the wall and you realize that you do have to go back. You need to learn. Um, I mean, I wonder if if in some cases it is a big disadvantage. I was thinking about this before our talk, and whenever I got to a person that I thought was disadvantaged by having an artist parent, I think what was disadvantaging them was more the fame, that their father or mother or whatever was famous. It wasn't that they were an artist, it was that they were a famous artist. I mean, I don't know what you think.
Well, but everything is relative. Like, for instance, Mozart's father was quite a successful musician, and yet Mozart kind of surpassed him, like
Yeah.
just like that. I mean, it's all relative to begin with, right? I mean, I think fame is an issue. You know who came to mind? Lucian Freud,
Yeah.
right? Which I thought was very interesting because imagine having having Sigmund for your grandfather. Like that's
Yeah.
just that's crazy. Like it's a pretty intense thing. And then for him to pivot in a way, and I think some of the elements is like if you're not going that way, you're going to pivot in an interesting way. And that's a really good way to create space for your own brilliance, right? And yet Lucian's uh paintings are nothing if not intensely
Yeah.
psychological, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The
incredible
culture.
examinations
Yes,
of,
exactly.
you know, humanity
Yeah.
from a very specific and very, very analytical from the
Yeah.
very first, from the very early ones. They're so obsessed with trying to understand, you know, humanity in that sense, right? With the
Yeah.
occasional dog. That's, so,
Yeah,
so
you're right. That kind of intense, almost surgical attention to the psychology and the physical and how he must have known that that was a good way to look at things, or that it was okay to be
yeah. Or,
so
or
hard.
he just knew it without knowing.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just think we bring with us, and it's just that I guess in the arts again, it is more visible, right? That background is easily traceable in a way that for other people it's not. But also, it is worth saying that, like again, for most of us, having somebody with an being born into an artistic background is not a boon of any kind. It
No,
just
it doesn't help you
it's a
really.
space of profound, like walking into that insecurity, right? Or kind of fragile existence with
Mm.
your eyes wide open, right? With having no illusions as to how horrifyingly
Yeah.
unpredictable our lives can be. I mean, having absolutely no illusions that this is what it's going to be,
I mean, I must say it's a profound gift having a father who's 20 years or whatever he is, 30 years down the road, so you can sort of see what's happening to him and go, right. I remember when I turned 30 and I just had my first kid, and when he was 30, he had already had me, but I wasn't much old. I was young. And what it knowing instinctively what it must be like to be a father and still trying to be an artist, and it was maybe in those areas that it's been really helpful because I can see how he dealt with it and maybe do some of those things and do other things differently. I wonder, there's an area though that I think is unique to the visual arts, maybe music as well, but But when your father or mother or whatever is an artist, and then you want to be an artist yourself, and there's this kind of intense need somehow to be a different artist, to not be the same kind of artist, or to define your own, what it is that makes you different or special, and how that can be a real misdirection for a lot of people. It definitely got in the way for me for a long time.
I mean, I didn't, uh, I grew up with kind of this. My father is, omniscient, omnipotent. That was kind of my parents. Just generally, that's what they led me to believe. And there was no internet, so they 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 were successful at it for quite some time.
Right.
And but for me, that breakaway moment, I mean, it's like, and I don't want to throw my father under the bus here, but for me, the breakout moment, and I just thought he was brilliant. As an art critic, he just had he and I didn't really know about his writing all that much, or I just knew the artists were hanging out with and what he thought about them. But for me, kind of the break moment came when he said he couldn't get Rothko, and 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 I thought, well, this is the point at which you stop and I start, because I totally get Rothko. And it was really like that was actually a very clear line for me, is that if he doesn't, and yet how is it that, I get all of that, that you're talking about, and you draw your line there. And I was like, that's really fascinating. This is in a way, it was kind of where I begin.
Oh,
It did.
yeah, you speak about that a lot. Yeah, I mean Rothko as your
Yeah. Yeah. Is it, well, I mean, he's kind of the beginning and the end of a lot of things, even though I started out, like every like every 5-year-old being obsessed with figuration of some kind and very painterly things. No, but I mean, I was that kid who was wheeled out for being able to identify all of the Renaissance masters
Mm.
on site at the age of 5. It's like, here, that was the show pony trick that my parents used to pull. It's like, what is that? That's a Botticelli. Um, so yeah, it was I was pretty good on that. So yeah, it's a fun kind of situation to be different from your parents, but I think it's so what you are you suggesting then that you come back to it without having the need to rebel and just
Yeah, that's kind of
go.
what I mean. I think I took more of a diversion away from this kind of the craft than I needed to, because I sort of felt like I needed to go into the other valley and make things that look like whatever, something else. And then you get to finally arrive wherever, hopefully at one point in your life, where you realize that you don't have a style. You just make work, and it looks like a way. You don't even have much control over that. You just have to make work from your heart or from your guts. But so this idea of creating a different look is really like missing the point.
Yeah,
But in
no,
those
it's okay.
times, in those years where I was thinking I should do that, I was referring to not really my father particularly, but a kind of world around him, and he studied at the Ruskin and at Oxford, and there was a kind of um, a traditional drawing based thing that he was doing. And then I went to that kind of school and I learned traditional painting. And a lot of me thought this was like going backwards and I want to go forwards. Um, so maybe that delayed it, but then maybe in the delay you come back to it with more meaning. You can't really unpick it. There's another realm, which is I used to work at this pub in London, which was owned by this guy, Sebastian Boyle, and his father and mother were the Mark and um, something Boyle, famous land artists. And then Sebastian and his sister joined the family collective. They became known as the Boyle family. And there was something it felt right to me. Like they'd sort of joined the family business. It was like Boyle and Sons, and and the work grew and became more collected, and the Tate bought works, and it seemed like a really good story, and then when the parents died, the kids just carried it on as the Boyle family. There's something quite beautiful about that. I'm not sure if it.
Did their children
I
join the family
I
trade?
don't know if Seb's got kids. He was a pretty strange dude. I mean, we were his kids. He took all these ragtag artists and musicians and paid us quite well and fed us and gave us free booze. And the pub was just heaving. But yeah, I don't know if I mean, I look at my boys now. You've got Dovey, he's a bit younger, but um, definitely, even though Max, for example, is interested in making cars, I can see that what he wants to do is make a sculpture. He's not thinking about how do I make a combustion engine. He's thinking of a sculpture. He wants to make this object in space. And I can see that that's not complicated for him. He understands that it's possible to take a thing from an idea and make a three-dimensional form that goes very fast.
I think there is the difference that uh and kind of some of the privilege of being, second, third, whatever generation is that, and it's something that I've noticed qualitatively is that art kids are raised differently, is that we are different as parents. And it's not actually about privilege as such, it's about being kind of precious about our children's creative space and validating that space, and
Yeah,
that builds a different person in a
yes,
sense, a person
yeah.
who doesn't feel like they need to apologize for their opinions or what they think. The first kind of kindy painting that Dovi brought for me, uh like I said what it is, and he just said it's a painting, you know, and and I was like euphoric. It was an unholy mess, quite frankly. But the point is, he didn't feel the need to conform in any way. He just said, like, Mom, it's a painting, and that was brilliant. And I see even with children of artists, the first generation artists that I see in Zimbabwe, some of them they're already different kids. It's a non-stamp
Hmm.
if it were that we put on the kids, rather than
Yeah.
we're less obsessed with discipline, where there is a sense of freedom that we give them because we've established that as a baseline
Mm.
for being, which is, there's discipline, but discipline is a form of responsibility to the freedom that you have, right?
Sure.
And that's a very interesting legacy. Like, art kids walk differently, they engage with adults differently. Like, I'm sure you know that, like,
Mm.
Doi just like treats all adults, and he's obviously is in a different education system, but there is this kind of sense that, like, artists are his community,
Yeah.
and a space where they're at home in, and that's beautiful. That's a really lovely thing. But there's no guarantees of any kind. Like, there are no,
No,
and
definitely
that's
not. Yeah, there's also a kind of I remember doing drawings at like 7 around then, and my father looking at them in a way that this is an artwork, what, and sometimes being amazed, and sometimes, but he was keeping them as artworks, not as cute mementos from this kid. And I look at the works that I've kept from my sons, and they're not like Leo's first drawing at age 9. I've kept the good ones, because to me those are
I've kept the good ones.
yeah. Um,
I've
and I know
kept the
I
good ones.
know I
You're
know how it
harsh.
felt to have your drawing looked at by your dad, who's also an artist, and him see something that's. I mean, I know that I look at some of the drawings that the boys do. Leo's got this style of drawing where he's not obsessed with the middle of the page. So there'd be things in the top left and things on the right. Sometimes you go off the page and come back in, when he was a kid. And I remember thinking, He's the bastard. I'm more obsessed by the middle than he is, and there's so much you can learn from that. And knowing that he probably knows instinctively that the relationship is twofold. I know that it's like that with my dad. We're learning from each other, and that's a camaraderie that's pretty priceless, and having that permissiveness.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what happens with Dovi. I mean, the one thing that I did notice with Dovi is that, this is disintegrating into
Hmm.
a kids, we love our kids discussion. But what I notice is that he just engages with the whole picture field. And I remember going to art class for studying when I was 5 and having to be told to engage with the whole picture field to understand that
Yes.
you don't do the line and
Yeah.
just, because I went to whatever, a specialist art class as you
Mhm.
would. And because I started out as an art critic, not
Yeah,
not
sure.
as an artist, and having to learn about the picture field, and Dovi just launches into the whole
Mm.
thing, and you know and the whole thing, and understands that you need to engage everyone. And I know that I find that I teach artists, like, don't just focus on the things that you're interested in, right? Like, I have to look at the whole bastard, so you need to engage with the whole bastard. It's like, namely the canvas or whatever it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. That's
So it
good
is.
advice, by the way. I'm gonna
Yeah,
I'm gonna take that into tomorrow in this chat.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's like people people just often ask, like, which ones, which is it, like, when we say, I often say that I either something is a bastard or a thing, or and I
Mm. Mm.
and and it doesn't mean I hate it or not like it. It's just that point of frustration. Or but or telling somebody that it's not disgusting is as good as a compliment. Instead, I just found myself, no, just that being here in the US, people, let's just say, are not into dark humor as much, or ironic. And
No,
so,
they take things pretty face value, right?
yeah, so I said to somebody, "Oh, I hate you," like, as a real compliment. And he just turned to me and said, "Why do you hate me?" And I'm like, "Dude, no, I meant that I like you." And I thought, this is me having, what is this, Gen X slang? If kids can call something sick, I'm sure I can say to somebody, "I hate you," in a very, very charming and just affectionate way.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the point also of being an Nepo kid, is that, like, I remember being raised with the sense of needing to be critical about everything all the time. Hey,
Yeah.
Anna. So, and and getting enjoyment out of that, right? Like, dissecting the stuff, not just saying,
Yeah.
not coming at something, "Oh, this is great, it's amazing," but really, really, uh, we get that it's amazing, but
Yeah,
let's
let's
do
work it
this.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, my father used to say that he really hated dating my mother because she was studying composition at the Conservatorium of Music, and she would take the score to the concert. And then the best fun that they had with her fellow students was just following the score and plucking out the errors that the musicians were making. And he was like, these guys were insanely impossible. But that was the fun. And I was like, by the time I was growing up as a kid and going to listen to symphony, I was also picking out, this was like, this is not
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I really don't like, I don't think he did such a great job with conducting, but that was the fun. And it makes us
Standard,
very
yeah. Yes.
makes us annoying people,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And
Even to each
so
other.
it means you're part of, then I guess you sort of, the elements of joining a particular tribe in a sense. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing is that it is a global tribe, and
Yeah.
it's actually a pretty generous and
Because it's so difficult to exist as an artist in any way that sustains you and your family. And, there's also there is camaraderie that those who stick at it and are still doing it, and they can even do it when they have kids. And then beyond that, there is, even if your ideas or ideology may be pretty varied, there's a general love that is emanated across
Yeah.
planets and I mean across countries and disciplines that you're still doing it and because you know what it takes.
Mm.
So that is a fraternity. You definitely, I think if you get through your 20s or whatever that is, whether you're Nepo or not, there is a kind of new family for you waiting. I'm speaking to the
Yeah.
audience, however small they
Yeah. I
are.
mean, there's a sense
Look
of
at it, because
sacrifice.
there's a family. We're your family. We're waiting for you.
Yeah. Because I mean, honestly, I mean, both of us have traveled a lot, and I find that, I can talk to artists anywhere on the planet. It is an instant family. Having said that, and no, this is going out to New York. I mean, to New Yorkers, but anywhere is that it takes a while. Even, going to an opening in a strange city is kind of an interesting experience. You know everything, about the space, and you still don't know how to penetrated because it vibrates slightly differently. And so
That's true.
somebody still needs to open the door. And
Yeah.
I think, we're all in that space once in a while, but it only takes one person
Yeah.
sometimes to
True.
open the door.
Yeah.
It's not really such a hard door. The art market and the art world, a whole other story. But
That
in
is
terms of
that couldn't be more different in some ways. Yeah.
it's sort of, but being an artist, it's kind of an egalitarian privilege because at a certain point we all pay our pound of flesh.